The words carved themselves into my memory like a brand against bare skin. Do not touch me in public. Duke Alistair Ravenshade hadn't shouted. He hadn't needed to. His voice was winter itself, cold, measured, absolute. He stood before the towering window of Ravenshade House, his silhouette sharp against the pale morning light filtering through heavy velvet curtains, and I understood in that moment that I had entered a prison disguised as employment. Do not speak unless directly addressed, he continued, each word dropping like a stone into still water. Do not draw attention to yourself in any capacity. You are here to serve my aunt, Miss Ashford, not to be noticed. My fingers twisted into the worn fabric of my gray dress, the one I'd stayed up mending by candlelight the night before, trying to hide the patches with embroidery that fooled no one. The dress that screamed everything I'd lost, everything I'd become. I wanted to tell him that I understood invisibility, that I'd been practicing it for months, ever since my father's gambling debts had surfaced like corpses in a river, ugly, undeniable, ruinous. That being noticed was a luxury I could no longer afford. Instead, I lifted my chin and said what was expected. I understand, Your Grace. But I didn't understand. Not then. Not when his gray eyes finally met mine for a fraction of a heartbeat before dismissing me entirely. Not when I saw something flicker in their depths, not cruelty, but something far more dangerous. Fear. 3 months earlier, I had danced in ballrooms that glittered like captured starlight. I had worn gowns that cost more than most families earned in a year. I had been Evangeline Ashford, daughter of Baron Ashford, welcomed in drawing rooms across London, my dance card perpetually full, my future seemingly secure. Then my father lost everything at the gaming tables, not just money, but estates, dignity, hope. The creditors came like vultures, stripping our home bare. My mother retreated to her sister's cottage in the countryside, her spirit as broken as our family name, and I discovered that being gently bred meant nothing when you had no fortune to support the breeding. Now I stood in Ravenshade House as a paid companion to Lady Edith Ravenshade, the Duke's elderly aunt. My room was small but clean, my salary modest but regular, my position clear. I was to be furniture, useful, well-maintained furniture that knew its place. The Duke's rules weren't cruel, they were surgical, precise, each one designed to ensure I never forgot the chasm between what I had been and what I had become. Before we continue deeper into this story, if you're drawn to tales of forbidden love, second chances, and the kind of romance that defies every rule of society, hit that subscribe button now. These stories only exist because you're here, and I promise you, what happens next will make you understand why some boundaries are meant to be broken. Lady Edith was nothing like her nephew. Where Alistair was ice, she was warmth. Where he built walls, she opened doors. She found me in the morning room that first afternoon, surrounded by half-finished embroidery and letters scented with lavender. "Come, child," she said, patting the seat beside her. "Let me look at you properly." Her hands were soft when they took mine, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in months, genuine kindness without calculation. "My nephew must have terrified you," she said, pouring tea with steady hands. "He terrifies everyone these days. Didn't used to, you know, before Catherine died." Catherine, the late Duchess. I'd heard whispers everyone had. Beautiful, fragile Catherine, who had died 3 years ago under circumstances that polite society refused to name aloud. Some said consumption. Others suggested something darker, though never loud enough for the Duke's solicitors to hear. "He's built those walls so high," Lady Edith continued, reading my silence accurately. "The marriage wasn't happy. Caroline was troubled, and when she died, society blamed Nathaniel, said he'd driven her to it. He's been punishing himself ever since, convinced that if he just controls everything, every word, every gesture, every interaction, nothing else can go wrong." I thought of the fear I'd glimpsed in his eyes. "That sounds exhausting." "It is, for him and everyone around him." Lady Edith squeezed my hand. "But you're not here to fix my nephew, dear. You're here to help me. And perhaps to remind him that not everyone in this house needs to be kept at a distance." I learned the rhythms of Ravenshade House the way one learns to breathe underwater carefully, constantly aware that one wrong move could prove fatal. Mornings began at dawn. I would help Lady Edith with her correspondence. reading letters from friends scattered across England, crafting responses in her voice while she directed from her chair by the window. Her friends were elderly women who remembered when the world moved slower, when scandal took weeks to travel instead of hours, when a lady's reputation was her most valuable possession. "Write to Millicent that I'm well," Lady Edith would say. "Tell her the rheumatism isn't troubling me as much. Don't mention that I can barely walk some mornings. She worries." I wrote lies wrapped in affection. I was becoming skilled at them. Afternoons were for reading. Lady Edith favored poetry, Byron Shelley, sometimes the scandalous new American poet Whitman, whose verses made her laugh with wicked delight. "Read that one again," she'd say. "The one about the body electric. Nathaniel would faint if he heard it." But it was the evenings I dreaded and craved in equal measure. That's when the Duke returned from wherever he spent his days: Parliament, his clubs, meetings with stewards and solicitors. I would hear his footsteps in the corridor, measured and purposeful, and my entire body would tense with an awareness I refused to name. He never sought me out, never acknowledged me beyond a slight nod if we passed in the hallway. I might have been a portrait on the wall for all the attention he paid me. Yet I found myself noticing things. The way he stood too straight, as if relaxing might shatter some internal structure holding him together. The shadows under his eyes that suggested sleep was as elusive for him as it was for me. The moment I caught him standing in the gallery, staring at a portrait of a blonde woman in a white dress, Catherine, surely his expression so bleak it made something crack inside my chest. Once, passing his study late at night when I couldn't sleep, I heard his voice through the door. Not cold this time, but passionate, alive with conviction. "The current housing conditions are unacceptable," he was saying to someone, his steward perhaps. "I don't care what it costs. Those families deserve walls that don't leak, roofs that don't cave in, floors that their children can walk on safely." "We're not discussing charity, Henderson. We're discussing basic human dignity." I stopped breathing, afraid he would hear me, afraid he would stop talking. This was the man beneath the ice, someone who cared, who felt, who wanted to change things. Someone who'd locked that part of himself away so deeply that even he might have forgotten it existed. I hurried past before he could discover my eavesdropping, but his words haunted me. The Duke wasn't simply the cold aristocrat he pretended to be. He was a man who'd chosen numbness over pain, control over vulnerability, isolation over the risk of another devastating loss. The first ball of the season arrived like a sentence. Lady Thornburne's annual event was the opening salvo of the social calendar, the night when London's aristocracy gathered to see and be seen, to assess who had risen and who had fallen, to begin the intricate dance of courtship and alliance that would occupy them for months. I dressed in my best gown, deep blue silk that had been expensive once, but now showed its age in ways only another woman would notice. The hem had been let down twice. The bodice had been altered to fit my thinner frame. It was beautiful in the way that ruins are beautiful. You could see what it had been, which made what it was now somehow worse. Lady Edith squeezed my hand as we entered the ballroom. "Remember, dear, they only have the power you give them." But power wasn't something you gave or withheld. Power was something that existed whether you acknowledged it or not, like gravity. The ballroom glittered with candlelight, reflecting off crystal chandeliers, jewels, champagne glasses. The air was thick with perfume and ambition, and everywhere I looked, I saw faces I knew: women who had once invited me to tea, men who had signed my dance card, families who had smiled at me across drawing rooms. Now they looked through me as if I were made of glass. I sat beside Lady Edith in a chair against the wall, my role achingly clear: be present, be useful, be invisible. "That's Lord Winter's dancing with the Peyton girl," Lady Edith murmured, her commentary providing a lifeline of normalcy. "He'll offer for her by month's end. And there's my nephew, looking as if he'd rather be facing the guillotine." My gaze found the Duke across the ballroom. He stood with a group of men, politicians, and peers, judging by their self-important postures, listening with apparent attention while his eyes remained distant, present, and absent in the same breath. He wore black evening clothes that made him look even more severe, his cravat tied with mathematical precision. every line of his body radiating the controlled power of a man who refused to feel anything. As if sensing my attention, his gaze shifted, landed on me for a fraction of a second, moved away. No acknowledgement, no recognition. Just as he'd promised. You will watch men you once danced with waltz past you as if you're invisible. He'd known. He'd understood exactly what he was asking of me, to return to the world that had cast me out, but only as a shadow, a reminder of how far someone could fall. He needs someone to soften him, Lady Edith said thoughtfully. Someone brave enough to ignore his rules. I'm here to follow his rules, my lady, not break them. Are you? Her smile was knowing. We'll see about that. The evening progressed with painful slowness. I fetched champagne, adjusted Lady Edith's shawl, smiled politely at the few people who deigned to acknowledge the Duke's aunt. I watched couples whirl past in dances I'd once participated in, heard laughter I'd once contributed to, felt the weight of invisibility settle over me like a shroud. Then the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks. A man entered late, and every head turned. Sebastian Blackwood. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year, not since before my father's ruin, not since the last ball where we danced and laughed and I'd believed my future was secure. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything, his dark hair falling just so across his forehead, his smile charming and just a touch wicked. But it was his eyes that found mine across the crowded room, warm, brown, filled with recognition and something that looked almost like concern. He crossed the ballroom floor purposefully, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the stares, ignoring every unspoken rule about who belonged where in this carefully stratified world. Miss Ashford, he said, bowing before me with a flourish that belonged to another era, another life. Would you do me the honor of a dance? The ballroom fell silent. Lady Edith's hand tightened on mine, warning or encouragement. I couldn't tell. And across the room, I felt rather than saw the Duke's gaze lock onto us, felt the temperature drop, felt something in the air shift and sharpen. Sebastian's hand remained extended, waiting. His eyes held mine with an intensity that said he knew exactly what he was offering. Not just a dance, but defiance, visibility. A reminder that I had existed once as something more than a shadow. My heart thundered against my ribs. The Duke's rules echoed in my mind. Do not touch me in public. Do not draw attention to yourself. I took Sebastian's hand and stood. Sebastian's hand was warm against mine. The first deliberate touch I'd received in months that wasn't born of necessity or duty. He led me onto the ballroom floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz, and I felt every eye in the room tracking our movement like predators watching prey. You've been hiding, he said softly as we began to move, his voice pitched for my ears alone. I've been surviving. There's a difference? I met his gaze and saw genuine concern there, not pity. Sebastian had always been perceptive. It was one of the things I'd valued about our friendship before everything collapsed. Sometimes the difference is so small, it doesn't matter. It matters, Evangeline. His grip tightened slightly. You matter. Don't let them convince you otherwise. The music swelled around us, and for a moment, just a moment, I forgot where I was. Forgot that I was wearing a mended dress while women in fresh silks swept past. Forgot that I was supposed to be invisible. I simply moved, letting muscle memory take over, letting myself feel the rhythm, the grace, the pure physicality of the dance. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, but then I caught a glimpse of the Duke over Sebastian's shoulder, and my breath caught in my throat. Alistair Ravenshade stood frozen at the edge of the ballroom, his usual mask of indifference cracked just enough for me to see what lay beneath. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides, his gray eyes burning with an emotion I couldn't name but felt in my bones. Fury, jealousy, something darker and more complicated that made my pulse quicken. He's watching you, Sebastian murmured, following my gaze. Good. Good? I tore my eyes away from the Duke, focusing on Sebastian. He's my employer. He gave me explicit instructions. To be invisible. Yes, I heard about his rules. Sebastian's mouth curved into something between a smile and a grimace. Alistair Ravenshade has always believed he could control everything through sheer force of will. Someone needs to show him he's wrong, and you've appointed yourself to that task? I've appointed myself to remind you that you're not a ghost, Evangeline. You're flesh and blood, with every right to exist in this room as anyone else here. His voice softened. I've known Alistair since we were boys at Eton. I know what he's doing to himself, locking everything away, refusing to feel. But that doesn't mean you have to disappear to accommodate his grief. The music shifted, requiring a turn that brought us closer together. I caught the scent of Sebastian's cologne, bergamot and cedar, familiar and comfortable in a way that should have been soothing but instead felt dangerous. Because comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when every moment of visibility came with consequences I couldn't predict. Tell me, Sebastian said, has he spoken to you, beyond those cold instructions? Once, maybe twice. I tried to remember actual conversations, but there had been none. Only brief exchanges that couldn't qualify as discourse. He avoids me because you terrify him. I nearly stumbled. That's absurd. I'm a paid companion to his aunt. I have no power here. You have more power than you realize. Sebastian's eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. You're the first woman to enter his household since Catherine died. The first person he can't simply control through distance and rules. You exist in his space, moving through his home. A constant reminder that life continues despite his determination to remain frozen in grief. You're reading far too much into this. Am I? He spun me gently, the movement bringing me face to face with the Duke once more. Alistair hadn't moved, hadn't looked away. His focus was absolute, terrifying in its intensity. Look at him, Evangeline. That's not the face of a man who's indifferent. But I couldn't look anymore. The weight of the Duke's gaze felt like a physical thing pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I focused instead on Sebastian's shoulder, on the familiar steps of the waltz, on anything except the man whose rules I was breaking with every turn. The music ended too soon, and not soon enough. Sebastian bowed, I curtsied, and for a heartbeat we simply stood there in the center of the ballroom while whispers erupted around us like wildfire. Miss Ashford danced with Blackwood. How extraordinary. Isn't she the Ravenshade companion? Reduced to service, I heard. Her father gambled everything away, and yet Blackwood chose her over Lady Margaret's granddaughter. The voices weren't meant to be heard, but they carried anyway, designed to wound, to remind, to keep everyone in their proper place. Sebastian's hand found mine again, squeezing gently. Hold your head high, he whispered. You've done nothing wrong, but I had. I'd broken the Duke's first rule. I'd drawn attention to myself, and as Sebastian escorted me back to Lady Edith's side, I felt the weight of that transgression settling over me like a sentence. Lady Edith's eyes sparkled with something that looked like triumph. Well done, dear. I shouldn't have. Nonsense. You should have, and you did. She patted my hand. My nephew needs to be reminded that he doesn't own the world, no matter how much he pretends otherwise. But the Duke wasn't pretending anymore. He was moving through the crowd with purpose, his path aimed directly at us, and I felt my pulse spike with something between dread and anticipation. He stopped before Lady Edith, offering her a bow that was precise and correct and completely devoid of warmth. Aunt, Miss Ashford. My name was ice in his mouth. I trust you're both well? Perfectly well, Nathaniel, Lady Edith said cheerfully. Miss Ashford was just telling me about her dance with young Blackwood. Wasn't it lovely to see her enjoying herself? The muscle in the Duke's jaw twitched, the only sign that he'd heard. His gaze flicked to me for a fraction of a second, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Not anger, not even disapproval. Betrayal, as if I'd taken something that belonged to him and given it away to someone unworthy. Indeed, he said, his voice carrying the chill of a winter grave. Miss Ashford, I believe my aunt requires her shawl. Would you be so kind? It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal, a reminder of my place, a punishment delivered with surgical precision. I stood, curtsied, and retreated with as much dignity as I could muster, but I felt his eyes on me the entire way, burning through the blue silk of my dress, marking me as his even as he pushed me away. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I fetched the shawl. I sat beside Lady Edith. I watched couples dance and conversations unfold, and the intricate machinery of society turn without me. But something had shifted. The other servants watched me differently now. The guests who had looked through me before now glanced at me with curiosity, or contempt, or something that looked almost like envy. Sebastian Blackwood had made me visible, and visibility, I was learning, was its own kind of prison. We left the ball near midnight. The carriage ride home was silent except for the clip of horses' hooves on cobblestones and the distant sounds of London settling into uneasy sleep. Lady Edith dozed against the cushions, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing certainty that everything was about to change. Ravenshade House loomed before us, dark windows reflecting moonlight like accusing eyes. The footman helped Lady Edith down, and I followed, my legs heavy with exhaustion and dread. "Miss Ashford," the Duke's voice cut through the night air. A word, in my study. Lady Edith squeezed my hand. "Be brave, dear." Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the entrance hall with a man whose control was visibly fraying at the edges. "Your Grace?" "Not here." He turned on his heel and strode toward his study, clearly expecting me to follow. I did, because what choice did I have? The study door closed behind us with the finality of a coffin lid, and suddenly the vast room felt impossibly small, the air thick with unspoken accusations. The Duke moved to his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he gripped the edge with both hands, his knuckles white, his head bowed as if in prayer or defeat. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, scraped raw. "I gave you one rule, Miss Ashford, one simple rule designed to protect both of us from precisely this situation. I'm sorry, Your Grace, but Sebastian Mr. Blackwood asked me to dance. Refusing would have caused more of a scene than accepting." "Sebastian." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You call him Sebastian. We were acquainted. Before. He turned to face me fully, and what I saw in his expression stole my breath. "Before you needed employment. Before you became invisible. Before you were mine too." He stopped abruptly, as if the words had escaped without permission. The silence stretched between us, taut as a bowstring. "I'm not yours," I said softly. "I'm your aunt's companion, that's all." "Is it?" He moved closer, and I forced myself not to retreat. "Then why does the sight of you in another man's arms make me want to tear this house apart brick by brick until there's nothing left but rubble?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Your Grace." "Stop calling me that." His voice dropped to something dangerous, intimate. "Stop being so damned proper when we both know something shifted tonight, when we both felt it." "Nothing shifted. I danced with an old friend, that's all." "Liar." The word was almost gentle. "You danced with a man who wants you, a man who sees you as I'm not supposed to, a man who doesn't have rules keeping him at a distance. Then perhaps you should reconsider your rules." The words were out before I could stop them, bold and reckless and completely improper. The Duke stared at me as if I'd slapped him, his chest rising and falling with breaths that sounded like they hurt. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Then explain it to me." I stepped closer, feeling brave or foolish or both. "Tell me why you built these walls. Tell me why I'm supposed to be invisible when you can't stop watching me." "Because everyone I've ever cared about has been destroyed by proximity to me." The confession exploded from him like a dam breaking. "Catherine married me and it killed her. My parents expected perfection and I failed them. Every person who gets close enough to matter ends up broken, and I cannot do that again." His hands were shaking. The great Duke of Ravenshade, the man who controlled everything, was coming apart before my eyes. "So you live in a mausoleum of your own making," I said quietly. "Alone, frozen, convinced that feeling nothing is safer than risking everything." "Yes, that's not living, Your Grace. That's just a slower way of dying." He closed his eyes. "Miss Ashford, Evangeline, if he could be honest, so could I. My name is Evangeline, and I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of pretending I don't see the man beneath the ice. I'm tired of rules designed to keep both of us safe from something that might actually be worth the risk." When he opened his eyes again, Something in them had changed. The walls were still there, but they had cracks now, fissures through which something dangerous and desperate leaked through. "You should go," he said, but his voice held no conviction. "Before one of us does something we can't take back." I should have obeyed, should have curtsied and retreated and returned to my assigned role. But standing there in the candlelight, watching the Duke struggle with feelings he'd buried for years, I made a choice. I stayed. The words hung between us like smoke, neither of us moving, neither of us breathing. The candles flickered in their sconces, casting shadows that danced across the Duke's face, making him look both younger and infinitely older than his years. "Evangeline," my name on his lips was a prayer and a curse. "You don't know what you're doing." "Then tell me." I took another step closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold armor he wore. "Tell me why one dance has you unraveling. Tell me why you look at me as if I'm something dangerous when I'm just a woman trying to survive." "Because you are dangerous." His voice was raw, stripped of all the polished control he usually wielded like a weapon. "You walk through this house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, and I don't know how to exist in light anymore. I've forgotten how." "So you'd rather I disappear? Rather I stay in shadows where you don't have to face what you're feeling?" Yes. The honesty of it cut deeper than any lie could have, because feeling led me to marry a woman I didn't love, to trap her in a life that slowly suffocated her, to watch her fade day by day until there was nothing left but resentment and grief. I killed her with my inadequacy, Evangeline, with my inability to be what she needed, and I swore on her grave that I would never inflict myself on anyone again. The anguish in his voice made my chest ache. I understood then that his rules, his coldness, his insistence on distance, none of it was cruelty. It was penance, self-imposed exile from everything that made life worth living because he believed he didn't deserve it. "Catherine's death wasn't your fault," I said softly. "You didn't know her. You didn't see. I see you." I reached out slowly, giving him time to retreat, to rebuild his walls, but he didn't move. My fingers touched his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath layers of silk and wool and carefully constructed armor. I see a man who's been carrying guilt that isn't his to bear, a man who's convinced himself that isolation is safety when it's really just another kind of death. His hand came up and caught mine, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "Stop." "Why?" "Because the truth hurts more than the lies you've been telling yourself. Because if you keep pushing, these walls will collapse." His eyes held mine, and in them I saw something that made my breath catch not anger, but desperate, terrified hope. And I don't know what's left of me underneath all this control. I don't know if there's anything worth saving. There is. I turned my hand in his grip, lacing our fingers together. The touch was electric, forbidden, perfect. "I've heard you late at night, talking about housing reforms, about protecting families, about basic human dignity. That's not the voice of a man who's hollow inside. That's someone who still cares, who still fights, who still believes things can be better." He stared at our joined hands as if they were a miracle and a catastrophe in equal measure. "You shouldn't have heard that, but I did. Just like you shouldn't watch me when you think I'm not looking, but you do. We're both pretending, Your Grace Alistair." His given name felt dangerous on my tongue, intimate in a way that crossed every boundary he'd erected. "We're both hiding from something that's already happened." "Nothing has happened." "Hasn't it?" I stepped closer still, close enough that I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his jaw, the way his pupils dilated when I breathed his name. "Then why are you holding my hand like it's the only thing keeping you anchored?" He released me abruptly, stepping back as if I'd burned him. The loss of contact felt physical, a severing that left me cold. "This is impossible. You work for me. You're under my protection, in my household, dependent on my goodwill for your survival. Any relationship between us would be honest." The word came out sharper than intended. "Real? Something that isn't built on rules and distance, and the pretense that we're both not desperately lonely?" "I'm not lonely," but his voice cracked on the lie. "I'm careful. There's a difference." "No, there isn't." Careful is just another word for afraid. His face hardened, the mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. You overstep, Miss Ashford. Then dismiss me. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze with a boldness born of having nothing left to lose. Send me away, write me a reference, and let me find employment elsewhere. At least then, we'll both stop this agonizing dance of pretending we don't affect each other. The silence that followed was suffocating. Alistair's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, his chest rising and falling with breaths that looked like they hurt. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I can't. 2 words. Just 2 words. But they shattered everything. Why not? Because he turned away, facing the window where darkness pressed against the glass. Because the thought of you leaving, of walking out of this house and never returning, is somehow worse than the torture of having you here, close but untouchable. Because I'm selfish enough to want you near, even if it destroys us both. Because I'm weak, Evangeline, despite everything I pretend to be. I moved to stand beside him, both of us staring at our reflections in the darkened glass. That's not weakness, that's being human. Humanity has only ever brought me pain. Then you've been doing it wrong. I turned to face him, forcing him to look at me. Pain isn't the price of feeling, Alistair. It's proof that we're alive, that we're capable of loving even when love seems impossible. Love. He said the word like a foreign language he'd forgotten how to speak. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. You are. I've seen it in the way you care for your aunt, in your passion for reform, in the way you look at me when you think no one's watching. I reached up slowly, giving him every opportunity to stop me, and touched his face. His skin was warm beneath my palm, and I felt him tremble. You're capable of so much more than you allow yourself to feel. His hand came up to cover mine, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. This is madness. Yes, you could be ruined, if anyone discovered. I'm already ruined, remember? My reputation was destroyed months ago, when my father's debts became public knowledge. What's left to lose? Your position, your security, your future. My future is worth nothing if I spend it hiding from the only thing that's made me feel alive in months. I stepped closer, eliminating the last vestiges of proper distance between us. I'm not asking for promises, Alistair. I'm not asking for marriage or security or anything beyond honesty. I'm asking you to stop treating me like I'm made of glass. To stop pretending you don't want this as much as I do. And what is this exactly? His voice was rough, his eyes dark with something that made my pulse race. What are you asking for? I don't know. The confession was liberating. I just know I'm tired of rules that make us both miserable. Tired of living in shadows when there's light right here, right now, if we're brave enough to reach for it. He stared at me for a long moment, war raging in his expression. Then slowly, carefully, as if I might shatter at any moment, he leaned down and pressed his forehead against mine. You're going to break me, he whispered. Good. Maybe you need to be broken. Maybe we both do. We stood there in the candlelight, breathing the same air, balanced on the knife's edge between everything and nothing. His hand moved to my waist, tentative, testing, and I felt the shudder that ran through him at the contact. The rules were designed to protect you from living, I interrupted gently. But I'm not asking you to abandon all caution, Alistair. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe some risks are worth taking. His fingers tightened on my waist, pulling me incrementally closer. If I do this, if I allow this, everything changes. Everything's already changed. The moment Sebastian asked me to dance, the moment you watched with that look in your eyes, the moment you called me here and confessed that you care, it all changed. We can either acknowledge it or spend the rest of our lives pretending. I am exceptionally good at pretending. I know, but doesn't it exhaust you? A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh or a sob every single day. Then the study door burst open, and we sprang apart like guilty children. Sebastian Blackwood stood in the doorway, his expression dark with an emotion I couldn't immediately name. Behind him, I could see a footman looking apologetic and terrified in equal measure. Forgive the intrusion, Ravenshade, Sebastian said, his tone anything but apologetic. But we have a problem. Alistair's entire demeanor shifted, the vulnerable man I'd glimpsed vanishing behind the Duke's cold authority. "Blackwood, this is highly irregular." "So is what I'm about to tell you." Sebastian's gaze flicked to me, softened slightly, then returned to Alistair with renewed intensity. "Lady Cordelia Ashworth has been spreading rumors about Miss Ashford, about tonight's dance, about—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "about the nature of her position in this household." Ice flooded my veins. "What kind of rumors?" Sebastian's expression was sympathetic but firm. "The kind that suggest you're not merely Lady Edith's companion. The kind that imply the Duke keeps you here for less respectable purposes." Alistair's face went white, then flushed with fury. "That's absurd. Cordelia has no basis." "She has eyes, Ravenshade, and so does the rest of society. They saw you watching Miss Ashford tonight, saw your reaction to our dance, saw enough to make assumptions that, while potentially incorrect, are spreading through London's drawing rooms as we speak." The room tilted. This was it, the consequence of visibility, of one moment of defiance, of daring to be seen. My position, my security, my fragile grasp on respectability, all of it crumbling, because I'd accepted a dance and a Duke had cared too much to hide his reaction. "I'll deny it," Alistair said immediately. "I'll make it clear that Miss Ashford's position here is entirely appropriate, that any suggestion otherwise is slander of the worst kind." "Which will only make people more curious," Sebastian interrupted. "You know how society works. The more vehemently you deny something, the more convinced they become it's true." "Then what do you suggest?" Alistair's voice was deadly calm, the tone of a man calculating his next strategic move. Sebastian looked at me, then back at Alistair. "I suggest Miss Ashford leaves London, immediately, before this scandal consumes both of your reputations beyond repair." "No," the word escaped me before I could think better of it. "I won't run." "You may not have a choice," Sebastian said gently. "Cordelia has influence. If she's determined to destroy you, and believe me, she is then staying will only give her more ammunition." Alistair moved to stand beside me, his presence solid and protective. "Miss Ashford isn't going anywhere. If Cordelia wants a battle, she'll have one. But it will be fought on my terms, not hers." The declaration should have felt reassuring. Instead, it felt like watching a noose tighten around both our necks. Because I understood something Sebastian and Alistair perhaps didn't. In society's eyes, the truth didn't matter. Perception was reality, and the perception that the Duke of Ravenshade had inappropriate feelings for his aunt's companion, whether true or not, was enough to destroy us both. The walls we'd been so carefully dismantling were about to come crashing down around us, and there was nothing either of us could do to stop it. The morning after Sebastian's warning arrived gray and cold, London wrapped in fog so thick it turned the world into ghosts and shadows. I hadn't slept. How could I, when every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way Alistair had looked at me in his study, vulnerable, desperate, alive, before Sebastian's arrival had shattered the moment like glass against stone. Lady Edith found me in the morning room, staring at a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. "The rumors have reached me," she said without preamble, settling into her chair with a grace that belied her age. "Cordelia's tongue has been wagging since dawn. Half of London believes you're the Duke's mistress. The other half thinks you're scheming to trap him into marriage." My stomach twisted. "Neither is true." "I know that, dear. But truth and scandal rarely keep company." She reached across and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "The question isn't whether you're innocent. The question is whether you're willing to fight for the right to make your own choices, regardless of what society thinks." "Lady Edith." "No, listen to me." Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, held mine. "I've watched my nephew bury himself alive for 3 years. Watched him build walls so high and thick that I thought I'd lost him forever. Then you arrived, and for the first time since Catherine died, I saw him feel something. Anger, yes, frustration, but also hope, life, the possibility that perhaps he wasn't as broken as he believed." Tears burned behind my eyes. "And now I've destroyed any chance he had at redemption. Cordelia will use this against him. The housing reform bill he's been fighting for his political allies will abandon him if they think he's embroiled in scandal. Then he'll find new allies. Lady Edith squeezed my hand. Nathaniel has spent years sacrificing his happiness for duty, for reputation, for the ghost of a marriage that was doomed from the start. Perhaps it's time he learned that some things are worth more than political capital. Like what? Like love, child. Like the chance to be human instead of perfect. The word hung between us, love, and I couldn't deny it anymore. Somewhere between his cold rules and his vulnerable confessions, between the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking, and the tremble in his hands when he'd finally touched me, I had fallen in love with the Duke of Ravenshade. Not with his title or his wealth or his position, but with the man beneath the ice, the one who fought for housing reforms at midnight, who looked at his dead wife's portrait with such anguished guilt, who was so terrified of causing pain that he'd chosen to feel nothing at all. It doesn't matter how I feel, I said quietly. He's made it clear that his reputation, his work, his control, they're more important than anything else. Has he? Lady Edith's smile was knowing. Or are you assuming that because it's easier than risking rejection? Before I could answer, the door opened and Alistair himself entered, looking as if he hadn't slept either. His hair was slightly disheveled, his cravat tied with less precision than usual, shadows under his eyes that spoke of a night spent wrestling with demons that refused to be controlled. Aunt, Miss Ashford. His voice was formal, but I heard the exhaustion beneath it. I need to speak with you both. Lady Edith stood gracefully. I suddenly find myself quite tired. I believe I'll rest in my chambers. You two can manage without me. She swept past Alistair, pausing only to pat his cheek. Be brave, Nathaniel. For once in your life, be brave instead of careful. Then we were alone, the silence heavy with everything unsaid. Alistair moved to the window, his back to me, his posture rigid with tension. I've spent the morning meeting with my solicitors, my political advisors, and several members of Parliament who have stakes in my housing reform bill. My heart sank. Of course, he was here to tell me I had to leave, that my presence was too dangerous to his work, that duty outweighed whatever fragile connection we'd begun to build. The consensus, he continued, his voice carefully neutral, is that I should issue a public statement denouncing the rumors. Make it clear that your position here is entirely appropriate, that Lady Cordelia's insinuations are malicious fabrications designed to damage my reputation out of personal spite. That makes sense. It's also a lie. I froze. Your Grace? He turned to face me, and what I saw in his expression stole my breath. No mask, no control, just raw, honest emotion that made him look younger and infinitely more vulnerable. Her insinuations aren't entirely fabricated, are they? His voice dropped to something rough and intimate. Because I do have inappropriate feelings for you, I am compromised by your presence. Every rule I established was designed to protect us both from exactly this, from the moment when I'd have to choose between duty and desire, between reputation and the first genuine connection I've felt in years. Alistair, let me finish, please. He crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate. I've spent the night thinking about what Sebastian said, about the scandal, about my work, my reputation, everything I've built, and I realized something that terrified me more than any rumor Cordelia could spread. He stopped before me, close enough to touch but not touching, the restraint visible in every line of his body. I realized that none of it matters if I'm hollow inside, that I could pass every reform bill, maintain every political alliance, preserve every shred of reputation and still be utterly alone, still be the man who's too afraid to live, because living means risking pain. My throat constricted. What are you saying? I'm saying that you were right, about the walls, about the control, about the fact that I've been dying slowly, convincing myself it was nobility when it was really just cowardice. His hand lifted, hovering near my face, asking permission. I'm saying that when Sebastian suggested you leave, every instinct I have screamed in protest. Not because of propriety or household management, but because the thought of losing you, of letting fear drive away the one person who sees me, truly sees me was unbearable. I leaned into his touch, feeling his palm cup my cheek with devastating gentleness. You're not a coward. I've been terrified of you since the moment you walked into my study. His thumb traced my cheekbone, the gesture achingly tender. Terrified of what you make me feel. Terrified of how much I want to touch you, to know you, to let you see all the broken pieces I've been hiding. But I'm more terrified of the alternative of sending you away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose you. The scandal will pass, or it won't. Either way, I've made my choice. His forehead touched mine, his breath warm against my lips. I choose you, Evangeline. I choose the risk of pain over the certainty of emptiness. I choose living over merely existing. If that makes me selfish, if it costs me political capital or social standing, so be it. Your housing reform will find support from people who care about the cause more than gossip. And if it doesn't, I'll fight harder, find new strategies. But I won't sacrifice you on the altar of political expediency. I won't make the same mistake I made with Catherine, choosing duty over honesty, control over connection. Tears spilled down my cheeks. You don't have to do this. I can leave quietly, find another position. You could. His hands framed my face, forcing me to meet his gaze. But I'm asking you not to. I'm asking you to stay, not as my aunt's companion, but as— he hesitated, vulnerability flooding his features. As someone I'm courting, openly, with the full knowledge that society will gossip and Cordelia will scheme and my political enemies will use it against me, but also with the hope that perhaps, if you feel even a fraction of what I do, you might be willing to face that together. I feel more than a fraction, I whispered. I feel everything, Alistair, and it terrifies me because I have nothing to offer you, no fortune, no family, no reputation worth protecting. You offer me life. His voice broke on the word. You offer me the possibility of being human again, of feeling without drowning, of loving without destroying. That's worth more than any fortune or reputation. Loving? The word emerged as barely a breath. Yes, no hesitation, no equivocation, just simple, devastating honesty. I love you, Evangeline Ashford. I don't know when it happened, perhaps the moment you stood in my study and refused to be diminished by my rules, or perhaps slowly, gradually, as I watched you bring light into this mausoleum I've been living in. But it's true, and I'm done pretending otherwise. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at this man who'd been so cold, so controlled, now offering me his heart with trembling hands. You don't have to say anything, he continued quickly, misreading my silence. I know this is sudden, that I have no right to expect. I kissed him. It wasn't planned or elegant. It was desperate and messy and perfect. All the emotion we'd been suppressing crashing together in a moment that felt like both ending and beginning. His arms came around me, pulling me close, and I felt him shudder against me. Felt 3 years of grief and isolation crack apart as he finally let himself feel. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, his smile was tentative but genuine, the first real smile I'd ever seen from him. I love you too, I said, because he needed to hear it. I love your broken pieces and your careful control and the way you fight for people who'll never know your name. I love that you're brave enough to admit you're afraid. I love— He kissed me again, softer this time, sweet and sure and full of promise. Marry me, he whispered against my lips. I pulled back, stunned. What? Marry me, not because of scandal or duty or reputation, but because I want you in my life permanently, because I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here, because I want to rebuild myself with you beside me, to learn how to live again with you as my partner. His eyes held mine, serious and hopeful and terrified. I know I'm asking a lot. I know I'm damaged and difficult and that life with me won't be easy, but I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of you, to be brave instead of careful, to choose love over control. Yes. The answer came without thought, without hesitation, welling up from somewhere so deep and true that denial was impossible. Yes, I'll marry you. His laugh was pure relief and joy. He spun me in a circle, both of us grinning like children. The weight of fear and propriety falling away to reveal something lighter, freer, infinitely more precious. When he set me down, his expression turned serious. Cordelia will fight this. She'll say I'm making a mistake, that you're unsuitable, that I'm destroying myself. Let her. I touched his face, marveling at the freedom to do so. We'll face it together. Every rumor, every scandal, every person who thinks they know what's best for us. Together. Together, he echoed and kissed me again. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the chapel at Ravenshade House, witnessed by Lady Edith, Sebastian Blackwood, and a handful of allies who cared more about happiness than social standing. Cordelia's rumors continued to spread, but they lost their power when Alistair confronted them, directly acknowledging our love, defending my character, and making it clear that anyone who disparaged his wife would answer to him personally. Some political allies abandoned him. Others, surprisingly, rallied stronger, respecting his honesty. The housing reform bill passed 6 months later, championed by men who valued integrity over conformity. We faced challenges, whispers at social events, strained relationships with those who believed in propriety above all else, moments when the weight of judgment felt crushing. But we faced them together, and that made all the difference. Lady Edith lived to see 3 grandnieces and grandnephews, delighting in telling them about how their uncle the Duke had been brave enough to choose love over duty, and how their aunt had been brave enough to be seen. Sebastian remained a loyal friend, eventually finding his own happy ending with a widow who appreciated his charm and substance in equal measure. And Alistair, my Alistair, learned slowly to live without walls, to feel without drowning, to love without the fear that it would destroy us. Some days were harder than others. Grief and guilt don't vanish simply because you've found happiness. But we worked through it together, building something stronger than either of us could have created alone. The Duke of Ravenshade, once frozen in grief and control, learned to thaw. And I, once invisible and forgotten, learned that being seen, truly seen by the right person, was worth every risk, every scandal, every rule broken along the way. Because some love stories aren't about perfection, they're about 2 broken people choosing to be brave together, to feel despite the fear, to live instead of merely surviving. And that, I've learned, is the most powerful kind of love there is. If this story touched your heart, the way Alistair and Evangeline touched mine, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Velvet and Vintage Tales. Every subscription tells me you want more stories of timeless love, of characters brave enough to risk everything, of romance that reminds us why we believe in happily ever after. And please, hit that notification bell so you never miss when the next story arrives, because there are so many more tales waiting to be told, so many more hearts waiting to find their courage. Leave a comment below. Would you have been brave enough to stay, knowing the scandal it would cause? Or would you have walked away to protect the person you loved? I'd love to know your thoughts. Until next time, remember, true love isn't about following the rules. It's about finding someone worth breaking them for.